From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore. Numbers and their significance, prepared and delivered by most excellent companion F.H. Shannon, Grand Z, within the research chapter number 100, on Tuesday the 27th of April, 1971. The mystical meaning and divine virtue of numbers formed an important part of the philosophy of Pythagoras, and from him have been transmitted to the Masonic system of symbolism. Pythagoras resided for some time in Egypt and brought his doctrines on the subject of numbers from there. Numbers are of two kinds, intellectual and scientific. Intellectual number is the basis of universal order. Scientific numbers are either equal or odd. Even numbers are female because even numbers admit of division. Odd numbers do not and are the most perfect. Pythagoras went further. 1, the monad, was male because its action produces no change in itself but only of itself. It represented the creative principle. 2, the duad, was female, being ever-changing by addition, subtraction, or multiplication. It represented matter capable of form. The union of the monad and the duad produces the triad, which signifies the world formed by the creative principle of matter. Pythagoras represented the world by the right-angled triangle because the square on the longest side is equal to the sum of the square on the other two sides. In symbolic masonry, 3, 5, and 7 are mystical numbers, and in Royal Arch Freemasonry, 9 is also a mystical number. Among ancient people, the even numbers were thought to be unlucky. Odd numbers were considered to be good omens and favourable signs. The ancients believed them to be of divine origin. Centuries before the Christian era, the Hindus claimed that their letters or numbers were derived from the language of the gods. Chaldean numbers were related to the position and grouping of the stars in the sky. To each number, Pythagoras ascribed a character and quality. 1, the monad, represented God, the point within the circle. It denoted love, concord, piety, and friendship. It was a symbol of existence, identity, and harmony. 2 was unlucky and denoted darkness and evil. It was because of this that the Romans dedicated the second month of the calendar to Pluto, the god of hell. 3 referred to harmony, peace, and temperance. The followers of Pythagoras called the number 3 perfect harmony. It was the most sacred of numbers. A reverence for its mystical virtues is to be found even among the Chinese, who say that numbers begin at 1 and are most perfect at 3. Plato declared that it was the image of the Supreme Being. So sacred was the number 3 among the ancients that we find it designating some of the attributes of all of the gods. 3 was considered among all the pagan nations as the chief of the mystical numbers because, as Aristotle remarked, it contains within itself a beginning, a middle, and an end. Hence, we find it designating some of the attributes of almost all the gods. The thunderbolt of Jove was 3-forked. The scepter of Neptune was a trident. Cerberus, the dog of Pluto, was 3-headed. There were 3 fates and 3 furies. The sun had 3 names, Apollo, Sol, and Liber, and the moon was 3 also, Diana, Luna, and Hecate. In all incantations, 3 was a favourite number, and hence the poet Virgil says, Numero Deus impare gaudet. God delights in all odd number. A triple cord was used, each cord of 3 different colours, white, red, and black. and a small image of the subject of the charm was carried thrice around the altar. The Druids paid no less respect to this sacred number. Throughout their whole system, a reference is constantly made to its influence, and so far did their veneration for it extend that even their sacred poetry was composed in triads. In all the mysteries from Egypt to Scandinavia, we find a sacred regard for the number 3. In the rites of Mithras, the Empyrean was said to be supported by 3 intelligences: Ormuzd, Mithra, and Mithras. In the rites of Hindustan, there was the trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Siva. It was, in short, a general character of the mysteries to have 3 principal offices and 3 grades of initiation. Pythagoras maintained that there is a mysterious connection between gods and numbers. The writings of Pythagoras must receive particular attention because he was initiated into the mysteries of several countries. His wisdom came from India as well as Egypt, and, in a sense, he acts as a kind of clearinghouse for the teachings of all ancient civilization. To you and I, numbers are useful in making mathematical calculations and in everyday transactions. However, numbers were a part of the secret language used to describe the creation of the universe and the evolution of the human soul. It is not difficult to understand how nature could have taught primitive man the first principles of numerical language. Nor is it difficult to understand why he should regard numbers as sacred. The number 3 was presumed to be one of the more sacred of the uneven numbers. This conception may have been due to the fact that primitive man divided the universe into 3 regions: heaven, earth, and water, each being represented in mythology by a deity. So we have Atlas, who is said to have supported the heavens on his shoulders, Aether and Hemera, who are said to have created the earth, and Neptune, the god of the sea. In the volume of Sacred Law, we find confirmation of the sacredness with which the number 3 was regarded, as we find many allusions to it for the purpose of emphasis, or to stress the importance of events. In Daniel chapter 6 verse 10, it is revealed that Daniel opened his windows towards Jerusalem, knelt 3 times a day, and prayed. In the first book of Chronicles chapter 21 verse 12, God spoke to David and gave him his choice: either 3 years of famine or 3 months to be destroyed before all foes. In the first book of Kings, chapter 17, verse 21, a woman whose son had died came to Elijah. And he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried unto the Lord and said, O Lord my God, I pray thee, let the child's soul come into him again. In Masonic lectures, we often speak of the 3 ages of man: childhood, which signifies an entrance into the world from a state of darkness and ignorance to experience, the dawn of light and intelligence; manhood, which denotes a probationary period between adolescence and maturity. During this period, we no longer remain in a state of darkness, but grow to possess light, prudence, and knowledge. When we attain the 3rd stage, age. Our strenuous labour of life is past, and we contemplate our endeavours and anticipate a new existence appearing along the horizon. The description of these 3 ages of man are illustrative definitions of the 3 degrees of symbolic masonry. The entered apprentice comes from the darkness and ignorance of the profane world into the dawn of light and knowledge of Freemasonry. The fellow craft increases his knowledge and proves himself worthy to attain the rank of Master Mason when he can contemplate the work to be done for the benefit of other fellow men. 3 basic qualifications are necessary to enable a man to petition for membership of our fraternity: to be free-born, of mature age, and sound judgment. Jehovah signified 3 in one being: one who is, one who was, and one who will be. The symbol of the triangle was used by the ancient Jews to represent deity, and the ancient nations used the triangles, or number 3, as a sacred symbol. The triangle represents the 3 principal components of man: body, soul, and spirit. 3 components are necessary to form a complete family: father, mother, and child. 3 attributes sustain life: faith, hope, and love. The number 4 referred to the deity. The ancients of many lands gave God a name of 4 letters. For example, the Assyrians, Adad; the Egyptians, Amun; the Persians, Sari; and the Latins, Deus. It was the Tetragrammaton of the Hebrews and the Tetractys of the Pythagoreans. The Pythagoreans called it a perfect number, and it has been adopted as a sacred number in the degree of the perfect master. In symbolic Masonry, 4 has no especial significance. 5 denoted light, nature, and marriage. Marriage, because it is made up of the female 2 and the male 3. The triple triangle, which was made up of 5 lines uniting into 5 points, was an emblem of health. Among the Kabbalists, the 5-pointed star with the name of God written on each of its points and in the center was considered talismanic. The number 5 was, among the Hebrews, considered a sacred round number and is repeatedly used in the Old Testament. This usage, says Gesenius, perhaps passed over to the Hebrews from the religious rites of Egypt, India, and other Oriental nations, among whom 5 minor planets and 5 elements and elementary powers were accounted sacred. Among Freemasons, 5 is symbolical of the 5 orders of architecture: Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, Tuscan, and Composite, and the 5 human senses: hearing, seeing, feeling, smelling, and tasting, and especially the 5 points of fellowship with which you are well acquainted. 5 is especially significant of the Fellowcraft degree, where 5 are required to hold a lodge, and where, in the winding stairs, the 5 steps refer to the 5 orders of architecture. 6 was also an emblem of health and a symbol of justice, because it was the first perfect number, that is, one whose aliquot parts, being added together, make itself. The aliquot parts of 6 are 3, 2, and 1, which added make 6. 6 lights of symbolic Masonry are referred to as 3 greater and 3 lesser lights. They are placed in the form of 2 interlaced triangles. The 3 lesser represent the patriarchal, Mosaic, and Christian dispensation. The 3 greater, the creative, preservative, annihilative power of God. The 4 lesser triangles formed by the intersection of the 2 great triangles are emblematic of the 4 degrees of ancient craft Masonry: entered apprentice, fellow craft, master mason, and holy royal arch. 7 was highly esteemed and called the sacred number because it referred to the creation of the world. Among the Hebrews, the etymology of the word shows its sacred import. From the word shebang, or 7, is derived the word shebang, to swear, because oaths were confirmed either by 7 witnesses or by 7 victims offered in sacrifice. For example, see the covenant of Abraham and Abimelech in Genesis 21-28. The Sabbath was the 7th day. Noah received 7 days' notice of the commencement of the deluge and was commanded to select clean beasts and fowls by 7s. 7 persons accompanied Noah into the ark. The ark rested on Mount Ararat in the 7th month. The intervals between dispatching the doves were, each time, 7 days. The walls of Jericho were encompassed 7 days by 7 priests bearing 7 ram's horns. Solomon was 7 years building the temple, which was dedicated in the 7th month, and the festival lasted 7 days. The candlestick in the tabernacle consisted of 7 branches. The Tower of Babel was said to have reached 7 stories high before it was destroyed. Among the heathens, 7 was also sacred. A few examples. 7 altars burnt continually before the god Mithras. The Arabians had 7 holy temples. The Goths had 7 deities: Sun, Moon, Tuisco, Woden, Thor, Frigga, and Satur, from whose names are derived our days of the week. In the Persian mysteries, the candidates had to pass through 7 spacious caverns. Cicero, in his Dream of Scipio, calls it the binding knot of all things, and Plato, in Timaeus, taught that the soul of the world was generated out of the number 7. Finally, sacrifices were always considered as most efficacious when there were 7 victims. 8 was esteemed as the first cube, 2 times 2 times 2, and signified friendship, prudence, counsel, and justice. It designated the principal law of nature which supposes all men are equal. It has been called the symbol of the resurrection because Jesus rose on the 8th day, i.e., the day after the 7th, because the name of Jesus in Greek numerals, corresponding to its Greek letters, is 10, 8, 200, 70, 400, and 200, which added up is 888. 9 was called perfect or finished because 9 months is the period required for the perfection of a human being before birth. Among Masons, the number 9, or 3 times 3, is sacred. 9 derives its value from its being the product of 3 multiplied by itself. 10 denominated heaven because it was the consumption of all things and was considered by the union of 1, the monad or active principle, 2, or the duad or passive principle, 3, the triad or world arising from their union, and 4, the tetractys. Thus, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. 10 contained all the relations, numerical and harmonic. The respect paid by Freemasons to certain numbers, all of which are odd, is founded not in the belief of any magical virtue, but because they are assumed to be representative of certain ideas. In Masonry, number is a symbol. It is venerated because it has concealed within some allusion to a sacred number, object, or holy thought which it symbolizes. The number 3, like the triangle, is a symbol. The number 9, like the triple triangle, is another. We must not confuse the Masonic doctrine of sacred numbers with the doctrines of numbers which prevailed in, for example, the system of Pythagoras. Much more could be said on numbers and their Masonic significance, but time does not permit, so I shall close by saying, if a Master Mason you would be, observe you well the rule of 3.